By the time I got to the Chicago files, it was already dark outside. In January, New Haven loses light early. By 6 o'clock, my office windows had turned into mirrors. All I could see in the glass was myself. A lamp over a stack of applications. A half-finished coffee. And the kind of face only admission season can give you. We had more than 50,000 applications that year. Most nights, I could stay clinical. You had to. If you let every story all the way in, the work would break you. So I read carefully. I took notes. I flagged files for committee. I moved on. Then I opened one from Northbrook, Illinois. Amanda Chin. My hand stopped on the page. Chin was my sister Jennifer's married name. I told myself it could be a coincidence. Chicago suburbs were full of them. Similar names. Similar schools. Similar polished 17-year-olds who knew exactly how to package themselves for people like me. Then I saw the address. Northbrook. My sister's town. I leaned back in my chair and stared at the ceiling. For 12 years, Jennifer and I had spoken so little that sometimes I could almost believe I didn't have a sister at all. I knew, abstractly, that she had a daughter. I knew her name was Amanda. I knew she was smart, because my mother used the word bright, the way some women use perfume, lightly and often. What I did not know was that Amanda had applied to Yale, and what I definitely did not know was that her file had landed on my desk. I should have stopped right there. Closed the folder. Sent it to Marcus. Recused myself before I saw one word. Instead, I opened her personal essay. The first line hit me so hard, I put the pages down. In my family, my Aunt Rachel was the cautionary tale. For a second, I could hear the blood in my ears. I picked the essay back up and read the sentence again. Slower this time. I had spent years building a life large enough to live inside without looking back too hard. A life with titles, routine, and responsibilities. A life that sounded solid. When people introduced me at conferences or put my name on a program, Dean of Undergraduate Admissions at Yale. Clean. Impressive. Finale. And still. With one sentence. From a 17-year-old girl I barely knew. I was no longer in my office, in New Haven. I was back, at my parents' dining room table, in Winnetka. Thanksgiving. November 23. 2012. The table looked exactly like it always did. Heavy serving dishes. My mother's good candles. My father carving turkey, like he was performing a procedure. Jennifer in a cream sweater. That probably cost more than my monthly rent at the time. Me, 20 years old, rehearsing the sentence in my head because I knew if I didn't say it before dessert, I wouldn't say it at all. I remember the time because I checked the microwave clock right before I did it. 6:47 p.m. I set down my fork and said, I'm leaving Northwestern. Nobody moved. It was the kind of silence that fills up fast, like judgment had shown up before anyone spoke. My mother blinked first. What do you mean? Leaving? I mean I'm withdrawing. At the end of the semester. Jennifer let out a short laugh, like I had made some strange, tasteless joke. My father didn't laugh at all. He set down his wine glass and said, No, you're not. I remember how calm I sounded at first. Calmer than I felt. I already submitted the paperwork. That was when the room changed. My mother's face went pale. Jennifer sat back in her chair and crossed her arms. My father looked at me, the way men look at damaged machinery. Like the failure was not only inconvenient, but offensive. You're halfway through. Jennifer said, Why would you do that? Because I'm miserable. I hadn't meant to say it that bluntly. But once it was out, there was no taking it back. I hate my major. I hate being there. I'm wasting time. I'm wasting money. And I can't keep pretending I'm fine. You think being unhappy is a reason to quit? My father asked. I'm not quitting. No, Jennifer said. What would you call it? I have a job in New York. That got their attention. In a different way. My mother frowned. A job doing what? At a publishing house? Editorial assistant. My father repeated it, like it was a punchline. So you're dropping out of a top university to become a secretary. It's not that. It is exactly that. He got quieter, which was always worse. Do you have any idea how many students would kill for your place at Northwestern? He asked. Do you understand what people spend their lives trying to earn? Something hot rose in my chest. Then maybe they should have it, I said. That was the wrong answer. Jennifer leaned forward. Do you hear yourself? You sound like a child. You don't leave college because it's hard. You finish. That's what adults do. I know how adults act. Jennifer. No. You don't. She snapped. You never have. My mother tried to step in. Rachel. Honey. Everyone gets overwhelmed. You can take fewer classes. You can switch majors. You don't blow up your whole future because you're having a bad year. It's not a bad year. Then what is it? It was the first time I remember telling them the truth and realizing, in the same moment, that the truth was not going to help me. It feels like I'm living somebody else's life. I said, I go to class. I sit there. I write papers I don't care about. And every day I stay, I feel worse. I don't want that life. Jennifer gave me that look. I knew too well. The one that always made me feel 17. Jalamsi. Behind. You don't even know what life you do want. Actually, I do. Working for almost no money. In New York? She said. In publishing? Rachel. That isn't a plan. My father pushed his chair back slightly. Let me make this simple. If you do this, you do it without our help. My mother turned to him. Harold. No. She wants to make an adult decision. She can live with the consequences. He looked at me again. No money. New rent. No safety net. You walk away from Northwestern. You walk away from our support. That was the moment. The room tipped from disapproval into exile. I wish I could tell you. I stood up and delivered some perfect speech. I didn't. I just sat there for a second, staring at the turkey going cold. In the middle of the table, feeling like I had become a stranger in my own family before anybody had even gotten to pie. Then Jennifer said, very flatly, this is embarrassing. That, more than anything else, was what did it. Not failure. Not fear. Embarrassing. Like I wasn't making a painful decision about my own life. Like I was staining the family furniture. I stood up so fast. My chair scraped the hardwood. My mother said my name. My father didn't. Jennifer looked away first. I grabbed my coat and walked out of the dining room. Through the front hall, past the framed family photos, and into the freezing Chicago night, with no gloves, no scarf, and no real plan, except this one. I was not going back. Not to Northwestern. Not to that table. Not to a life that already felt borrowed. I stood on the sidewalk, shaking in the cold, my breath coming in white bursts, and for the first time since I had spoken, nobody was telling me who I was. That should have felt like freedom. Mostly. It felt like falling. 3 weeks later, I moved to New York with one suitcase, a winter coat that wasn't warm enough, and $1,800 in savings. That number lived in my head, like a pulse. I knew exactly how much of it disappeared. The first day, bus ticket, security deposit, first month's rent, MetroCard, groceries, a chipped blue mug from a discount store because it felt deranged to move into an apartment with no mug. By the end of the week, the number had dropped so fast, it stopped feeling like money and started feeling like time. My apartment was in Brooklyn, if you were being generous, and on the edge of somewhere less flattering, if you were being honest. 280 square feet. A hot plate on a counter that leaned slightly to the left. A bathroom so narrow, I had to stand half sideways to close the door. At night, I lay in bed and stared at a water stain on the ceiling that looked like Florida, trying not to calculate how many mistakes I had made in under a month. The job was at a literary publishing house in Manhattan. One of those old names that sounded more impressive than it paid. Hartley and Sons. My title was editorial assistant. My actual job was to be useful before anyone had to ask. I made coffee runs. I scheduled meetings. I answered phones. I shipped manuscripts. I fixed formatting problems. I sat outside offices while assistant editors, senior editors, and agents swept by in expensive coats, speaking a language that was half books and half power. Sometimes they forgot I was there. Sometimes that helped. Because what nobody tells you about being the lowest person in a room is that you hear everything. Which books people secretly hated. Which authors everyone pretended to admire. Which manuscripts made an editor sit up straighter. Which ones got dismissed. In a sentence, I watched all of it. And when I was done with the work no one wanted, I read submissions, queries, sample chapters, unsolicited novels from men in Ohio who believed they had reinvented language, thin little stories from women in Portland that nobody in the office had time for. But that left me thinking about them on the subway home. At first, I read because it felt like proof I belonged there. Then I read because I realized I was good at it. Not good in the glamorous way people imagine when they think of publishing. Mostly. There was fluorescent lighting, too much takeout, and the slow accumulation of judgment. This works. This doesn't. This voice is imitating. This one is hiding. This scene is dead. This sentence is alive. I began to understand that reading well was not the same as reading a lot. It meant sensing where a story was telling the truth and where it was performing intelligence instead of earning it. It meant seeing what a writer was reaching for, sometimes before they saw it themselves. That turned out to matter. But in those first months, what mattered more was rent. I learned the grocery store schedule for markdown bread. I learned which subway transfer saved 9 minutes and which one saved my sanity. I learned how long I could make a box of pasta last if I pretended garlic and olive oil counted as a real dinner. My mother called once a month. The calls were careful, in a way that made them worse. She would ask if I was eating enough, ask if my apartment was safe, ask whether I had thought any more about going back to school. Then, almost without fail, she would slide into updates about Jennifer. Jennifer made partner track. Jennifer and David were looking at condos. Jennifer was exhausted, but in a good way. Productive. Successful. Worth being tired for. I never asked for these updates, but my mother delivered them, like weather reports, from a country I had been denied entry to. One night, about 6 months after I moved, Jennifer called herself. That was unusual enough that I almost didn't answer. I was standing in my apartment, eating yogurt over the sink, because I was too tired to wash a bowl. When I saw her name on my phone, I actually laughed once, without humor. Then I picked up. "Hey," I said. "So you are alive?" She said. "No, hello. No, how are you? Good to hear your voice too. I heard from Mom that your building had some kind of break-in. It was the building next door. That's still not exactly reassuring." I waited. Finally, she said. "Mom is worried about you." "I'm fine." "Are you?" There it was. Not curiosity. Appraisal. "Yes." "You live in a shoebox? You work 80 hours a week. For what? 28 grand? Close enough? And you still think this was the right move?" I leaned against the counter and shut my eyes. Outside, someone was blasting music from a car, so loudly, the bass rattled my window. "I don't know," I said. "Maybe ask me. When I'm not 20 and terrified." Jennifer exhaled sharply. "This is exactly what I mean. You act like fear is depth. Like struggling automatically makes your choices meaningful." That landed harder than I wanted it to. "It's not that." "Then what is it?" "Because from where I'm sitting, you threw away a Northwestern degree for an entry-level job in an industry famous for underpaying women who think books are a personality." It was such a Jennifer line. Precisi. Mean. Intelligent enough to pass for insight. But I was too tired to admire it. I didn't throw it away. I said, "I left something that was wrong for me." "And replaced it with what?" I looked around my apartment. The hot plate, the stack of manuscripts on the floor, the one lamp that made the room feel less temporary than it was. "I don't know yet," I said. She went quiet for a beat. Then she said, "That should scare you more than it does." What I wanted to say was, "It does. It scares me when I wake up and check my bank account before I brush my teeth. It scares me when I see Columbia students on the subway and wonder what kind of person I would be if I had stayed put. It scares me when the office goes quiet at 5:30 and everyone above me goes home to apartments with dishwashers and people who think they're impressive." Instead, I said, "Maybe I'm allowed to not know everything at 20. Jennifer gave a short, humorless laugh. "That's not the point, Rachel. The point is, people ask about you." I already knew what was coming. "And what do you tell them?" "A pause." Then, flatly, that my sister dropped out of college and moved to New York to work in publishing. I waited. She finished it for me. "Do you know how that sounds?" I looked down at the yogurt, melting against the side of the container, in my hand. "Yes?" I said. "I think I do." After she hung up, I stood there, for a long time in the half-dark, listening to the refrigerator hum. What got to me was not the insult. It was the phrase, "People ask about you," as if I had become a family problem to manage. That night, I almost opened Northwestern's website. Almost. I sat at my tiny kitchen table, with my laptop open, and the cursor blinking in the search bar. The digital door was right there. One decision away, one apology away, one phone call away from becoming, in my family's eyes, redeemable. Instead, I closed the computer and opened a manuscript I had smuggled home in my tote bag. It had a terrible title. New agent. No credentials. That would have made anyone in my family sit up straighter. But somewhere around page 14, I found something alive in it. Not polished. Not market ready. Just alive. A voice trying. Very hard. To tell the truth, the next morning, I left a note on an assistant editor's desk, telling her not to reject it yet. That was the first time anyone at Hartley noticed I wasn't just useful. A few weeks later, she stopped by my desk and said, "You were right about that submission." It was a small moment. Embarrassingly small, if you explained it to the wrong person. But it was the first time, since leaving school, that something in my life clicked into place, without force. After that, I started staying later by choice. I read faster. But more importantly, I read deeper. I paid attention in meetings. No one thought I was high enough to understand. I watched the gap between reputation and judgment, between prestige and instinct. Slowly, the work stopped feeling like punishment for leaving one path and started feeling like the beginning of another one. I still lived in the same cramped apartment. I still had too little money. I still got calls from home that left me feeling 12 years old and vaguely defective. But there were moments now. An editor asking what I thought. A manuscript I could not stop thinking about. A sentence in the margin of my notebook. "You are not lost. You are early." The first person, whoever suggested I might belong somewhere bigger than Hartley, did not do it dramatically. She was an adjunct who taught one evening publishing seminar we co-sponsored downtown. Her name was Elena Morales, and she had the unnerving habit of looking directly at people when they answered. One night after the event, I was helping stack folding chairs while everyone else hovered around wine and networking. She watched me for a minute and said, "You ask writer questions." I laughed. "I'm not a writer." That's not what I said. A few months later, she came by the office again and stopped at my desk. On the way out, "Have you ever thought about teaching?" she asked. I actually smiled. I didn't even finish college. Elena tilted her head. "That wasn't my question." Then she left. For the rest of the afternoon, I couldn't concentrate. Teaching. The word felt absurd on me. Too clean. Too credentialed. Too far away from the version of myself, eating pasta in a studio apartment and counting subway swipes. And yet something in me reacted to it before my mind could reject it, not because I thought I deserved it, because for the first time, I could imagine a future that wasn't built out of damage control. That night, I rode the train home, with my forehead against the window, watching my reflection shiver over the dark glass. For the first time since I had left Northwestern, I felt something steadier than defiance. Not confidence. Direction. If you had asked me at 22 what success would look like, I probably would have described something embarrassingly simple. A real apartment. Health insurance. That didn't feel theoretical. Enough money in my bank account that I could go to the grocery store without doing math in my head. I would not have said graduate school. I definitely would not have said Yale. At 22, success still looked like survival, with better lighting. But life has a way of changing shape while you're busy trying to make rent. At Hartley, the more I learned, the less invisible I became. It didn't happen dramatically. What happens instead is quieter. Someone starts asking what you think. Before a meeting, someone leaves a manuscript on your desk with a sticky note that says, "Worth my time?" Someone important misjudges a book. And you don't. That kind of thing accumulates. By my third year, I had moved from assistant work into actual editorial development. Not glamorous, not powerful, but close enough to the center that I could finally see the machinery clearly. Books were not acquired because the purest art won. They were acquired because taste, timing, ego, money, trend forecasting, fear, intuition, and office politics all lined up on the same day. And yet, inside all that noise, there were still moments of real discernment. A debut author whose voice seemed to rearrange the air. In the room. An essay collection. That looked too niche. Until the right editor, read page 12, and realized it wasn't niche at all. I loved those moments. Not because I liked being right, though I did. More because I liked the feeling of recognizing something before it had been officially recognized. Around that time, Elena called out of the blue and asked if I wanted to guest lecture in one of her evening classes. On what? I asked. Revision, she said. And how to tell when a piece is hiding from itself. I almost said no. Not because I didn't want to do it. Because I did. Immediately. In a way that made me suspicious. Still, I said yes. The classroom was at NYU. On an upper floor, with bad fluorescent lighting, and windows that reflected the city back at itself. I remember standing outside the room, beforehand. Notes in my hand. Feeling ridiculous. I had no degree. No official right to be at the front of a classroom. No clean biography that would make a student look at me and think, yes, this is a person whose path I should trust. Then Elena opened the door, handed me a dry erase marker, and said, try not to bore them. The students were sharper than I expected, and less polished. A good combination. They asked real questions. How do you know when a draft is performing intelligence instead of discovering anything? How do you revise without sanding off the thing that made the piece alive? How do you tell whether someone's feedback is useful or just loud for 90 minutes? I forgot to be self-conscious. I talked about rhythm, about motive, about the difference between competence and truth. Afterward, 3 students stayed behind, with pages in their hands, and the kind of nervous seriousness I recognized instantly. They wanted help. Specific help. Real help. One had an essay that was technically clean and emotionally dead. One had a messy, alive story she clearly didn't know how to structure. One had talent, but kept writing toward what she thought a professor wanted. I stood there, with their pages in my hands, and felt the same click I had felt years earlier, when that assistant editor told me I was right about a submission. This too. Some part of me said. After that, I started taking on more workshops. A one-off here. A weekend seminar there. Nothing impressive enough to tell my family about, which was part of why I liked it. During the day, I edited and developed manuscripts. At night, I taught people how to hear themselves more clearly. The two things fed each other. And somewhere in that overlap, Elena said something that changed the scale of my life. We were walking downtown, after a panel, one rainy evening. Both of us holding umbrellas. The wind kept trying to invert. You should get an MFA, she said. I actually stopped walking. That is a deeply expensive suggestion. I didn't say it was a convenient one. I didn't finish undergrad. You have publishing experience? Teaching instincts. And a brain that knows how to read. Stop introducing your life to yourself, like it's a disqualification. I laughed. But weakly. She kept going. You keep talking, as if legitimacy is a club someone else grants you. Sometimes it is. Most of the time. It's just a room. You enter. Before you feel ready. That sentence stayed with me. For months. I wish I could say, I applied immediately. I didn't. I opened application portals, and closed them. Drafted personal statements, and deleted them. Looked up tuition, and nearly choked. Talked myself out of it, at least 15 times. Then one night, after teaching a workshop, where a student had broken down in tears, because she thought her work was too messy to count, I rode the train home, and realized I had spent years telling writers not to confuse a crooked path with a dead end. Maybe it was time to listen to myself. I applied to Columbia's MFA program because it was local and because, in some masochistic corner of my brain, I wanted to know whether a place that serious would take someone like me seriously. When I got in, I read the email 3 times before I believed it. Then I cried in the staff bathroom at Hartley, locked in a stall with my phone in my hand and mascara I could not afford streaking down my face. I was 26. I worked full-time and went to school at night. It was awful. Not emotionally awful, logistically awful. Exhaustion as a way of life. I lived by calendar alerts and bodega coffee, and whatever scraps of attention were left after the rest of my life had taken its share. I read on the subway, drafted in waiting rooms, marked up student pages during lunch breaks, wrote workshop comments at 1 in the morning while my radiator hissed like it resented me personally. But I loved it, in the pure, irrational way. People only love things that cost them something, not every part of it. Some workshops were insufferable. Some classmates had the exhausting confidence of people who had never once mistaken shame for personality. Some professors performed brilliance rather than teaching, but underneath the fatigue and ego and noise, there was the work. The work was real. I wrote. I revised. I taught. I got sharper. And more importantly, I stopped thinking of my life as a detour from some rightful version of itself. It was my life. I graduated at 28 and moved into more formal teaching. By then, my publishing resume was strong enough to matter, and my degree made me legible to institutions that previously would have admired me, only at a distance. Within a few years, I was teaching undergraduate creative writing and composition, then helping with departmental reviews, then sitting in on scholarship discussions, then doing the sort of committee work that sounds dull until you realize decisions get made there about whose promise counts. That was where admissions entered my life. At first, it was small. Internal reviews, student evaluations, borderline cases for departmental fellowships. But I found myself drawn to it with the same intensity I had once brought to manuscripts, a transcript, a statement, recommendations, a file trying to contain a human being. And once again, I could feel how often the file told only part of the truth. A student with perfect grades and no real curiosity. A student with uneven numbers and startling originality. A student whose record looked unstable until you noticed the part-time jobs, the caregiving, and the resilience hidden in plain sight. When Yale first reached out, I assumed it was a mistake. Not because I lacked the resume by then. On paper, I was increasingly hard to dismiss. Published work, academic leadership, admissions experience, recommendations, from people whose names opened doors. Still, Yale belonged in a category of American institutions that feel less like workplaces and more like nouns people use to settle arguments. When the recruiter emailed, I read the message. The way you read a medical result, you don't yet know how to interpret. Then I forwarded it to Elena. With one line, "Is this insane?" She called me. Instead of answering, "No," she said, "It's late. For them, they should have found you sooner." The interviews were long, polished, exhausting. But once we started talking about applicants, something in me went still. This was judgment. Who gets seen? Who gets interpreted generously? Who gets written off because their path makes comfortable people nervous? I could do that work. More than that, I cared about that work in a way that made me useful to the right institution. When they offered me the position, I sat alone in my apartment and stared at the wall for a long time. Then I laughed, because somewhere in Illinois, if my family ever heard about this reality itself, I was going to sound sarcastic. The college dropout, the family embarrassment, now helping decide who got into Yale. And yet, by then, I didn't want their reaction as much as I once would have. That hunger had thinned over the years. Starved by distance. My mother called occasionally. My father almost never did. Jennifer and I remained in that brittle, polite exil families sometimes construct when the original conflict has calcified into identity. We were no longer actively fighting. We were simply no longer in one another's lives. Which was why, months into the job, sitting in my office in New Haven, with Amanda Chin's application open in front of me, I felt something I had not let myself feel in years. Exposure. I looked down at her essay again. In my family, my Aunt Rachel was the cautionary tale. Then I turned the page and kept reading. I expected Amanda's essay to be clever, maybe polished, maybe strategic. What I did not expect was honesty. The real kind. The dangerous kind. I kept reading. For most of my life, my Aunt Rachel existed in our family as a warning. She was the story told when someone wanted to make a point about discipline, about wasted potential, about what happens when you leave the safe path too early. I stopped there. Not because I couldn't continue, because I knew that tone. I had lived inside that tone. I could hear Jennifer using it, could hear my father's clipped certainty, could hear my mother trying to soften the edges without ever changing the shape. I read on. When I was younger, I accepted that story because children accept the world they're handed. If the adults around you all point in the same direction, you assume that must be where the truth is. Then, when I was 16, I looked her up. I sat back in my chair, outside my office. The hallway had gone quiet. Most of the admission staff had already left. Inside the silence, I kept reading. I expected to find exactly what my family had prepared me to find. A stalled life, a string of compromises, maybe a résumé, trying a little too hard. Instead, I found someone with a career so thoughtful and self-directed that it made me question everything I thought I knew about success. I found my aunt teaching. I found her writing. I found her speaking about publishing, education, and unconventional paths, with an authority that didn't sound borrowed from anyone else. And eventually, I found out she had become Dean of Undergraduate Admissions at Yale. I actually laughed then. One short, disbelieving breath. There it was. My life, flattened into family folklore, then handed back to me through my niece's voice. As if I were reading the report on a person who hadn't actually lived her own life. I looked at Amanda's file photo, 17, clear-eyed. Jennifer's mouth. Maybe. But not Jennifer's gaze. She looked like the kind of student who noticed things and then stayed bothered by them. That made the next part even harder to read. The discovery embarrassed me, but not in the way my family would have expected. I wasn't embarrassed by Rachel. I was embarrassed by how easily I had accepted a story because it was repeated with confidence. It made me wonder how many other beliefs in my life had been inherited instead of examined. That line went through me cleanly. Inherited instead of examined. That was good. Very good. And because it was true, it widened as it moved. It wasn't only about me anymore. I kept going. I had spent years Trying to become the kind of daughter my mother admired. Excellent. Composed. Impossible to criticize. Perfect grades. Perfect scores. Productive extracurriculars. The kind of life that makes adults relax, because it can be explained at cocktail parties. But once I understood my aunt differently, I began to question whether being legible was the same thing as being alive. I put the pages down and covered my mouth with my hand. There it was, the real center of the essay. Not my aunt succeeded. Not my family was cruel. But this, what if the life everyone praises is just the life they find easiest to describe? My eyes dropped to the bottom of the page. I want to study writing, not because it is practical, and not because it is safe, but because I have seen what happens when a person builds a life around other people's definitions of credibility. My Aunt Rachel showed me that the most important decisions may be the ones that make you harder to explain. For a while, I read that sentence 3 times. Not because I didn't understand it, because I did. Too well. For 12 years, I had told myself I was past needing anything from my family, beyond distance. I had built a whole adult life on that premise, and yet here I was, alone in an office at Yale, crying over 650 words written by a girl I had met maybe 3 times in my life. Not because she admired me, because she saw me. Not the polished biography, not the irony of my title, not the neat little arc from failure to success. She saw the actual cost. I wiped my face and reached for the internal review sheet. That was when common sense returned. I could not touch this application. Not like this. I picked up my phone and called Marcus Washington, my associate dean. He answered on the second ring. "You're still there?" he asked. "I need you in my office." "That sounds bad." "It's not bad," I said. "It's complicated." Marcus had the kind of face institutions trust instantly. Calm. Warm. Unreadable when he wanted to be. When he came in, he handed him Amanda's folder, without explanation. "Read the essay first," I said. He sat across from me and did exactly that. I watched his face do almost nothing, which was one of the reasons he was good at his job. A slight pause, halfway down page 2. A longer stillness, near the end. Then he closed the folder and looked up. "Well?" he said. "That's useful." He ignored that. "The essay is excellent. Thoughtful. Controlled. Genuinely self-interrogating. The rest of the file is strong too. She's not coasting on writing. The numbers are real." "I know." He studied me for a second. "Whose kid is she?" "My sister's." His eyebrows went up, but only slightly. "That's a lot." "Yes?" "Does the committee know?" "No." "Should they?" "Eventually. Not before a clean read." Marcus leaned back. "Okay. Then here's the clean read. She's competitive on every measurable dimension. And the essay gives us something we almost never get at that level. An applicant who is not merely accomplished, but awake? She's interrogating inherited values. She's taking emotional risk without turning it into performance." He tapped the folder lightly. "If this weren't your niece, I'd want her in committee." I nodded once. "That's what I thought." He was quiet. Then he said, "Can you recuse? Without micromanaging?" "That feels pointed." "It's meant to." I almost smiled. "Yes," I said. "I can." He held out his hand for the folder. "Then let me do my job." After he left, I sat there, in the suddenly too quiet office, and tried not to think about outcomes. That lasted maybe 4 minutes. Because of course, I thought about outcomes. I thought about Amanda opening an email in March, and whatever expression would cross her face. I thought about Jennifer telling people where her daughter got in, without mentioning that her estranged sister was sitting inside the institution like an inconvenient ghost. I thought about my father, who had once spoken about elite education as if it were a moral category rather than a resource. The committee discussed Amanda's application. 2 weeks later, I left the room before they started. I did not trust myself with optics, so I walked out, closed the door, and stood at the end of the hallway, looking at a portrait of some dead Yale benefactor, while 20 years of family history got compressed into an hour of institutional process. Behind me, Marcus found me afterward. "She's in," he said. I didn't realize how hard I had been bracing until that moment. "Unanimous?" He nodded. "Unanimous." I let out a breath that felt older than it should have. "She earned it," he added. "I know." He waited. "What now?" he asked. That was the question. The professional answer was simple. Nothing. Let the regular process unfold. Maintain the boundary. Protect the institution. Protect yourself. The personal answer was less elegant. For 12 years, Jennifer and I had lived inside a silence so complete, it had become self-justifying. Each year apart made the next year easier to explain. And yet Amanda had just walked straight through it. That night, long after the office had emptied, I sat at my desk, with my phone in my hand, and Jennifer's number open on the screen. I still knew it by heart. I pressed call before I could reconsider. She answered on the fourth ring. Breathless. Distracted. "Hello." For a second, I almost hung up. Then I said, "Jennifer." Silence. Then, cautiously, "Rachel?" The sound of my own name in her voice nearly undid me. Not because it was warm. It wasn't. But because it was familiar, in a way I had trained myself not to miss. "Nothing's wrong," I said quickly. "Amanda is fine." Another pause. "Then, you called about Amanda?" "She applied to Yale." I heard her inhale. "Oh my God. Rachel." "I swear to you, I didn't know her file would come to you. I didn't even know. I mean, I knew you worked there. Obviously. But I didn't think. I'm not accusing you of anything." She stopped. I went on. "She was admitted." For a moment, there was no sound on the line at all. Then Jennifer made this small, broken noise that I had never heard from her in my life. "Admitted?" "Yes." "To Yale?" "Yes." "Jennifer." "To Yale." She started crying. Not gracefully. Just crying. When she finally spoke, her voice was ragged. "She did it." She did. There were a dozen ways I could have used that moment. A dozen sharp little revenges available to me at no moral cost. Instead, I said the thing that had been lodged in me since I read the essay. "Have you read what she wrote?" Jennifer went quiet again. "No," she said after a moment. "She wouldn't let me. She wrote about me." A very long silence. This time, when Jennifer spoke, the confidence was gone from her voice. "What did she say?" I looked down at the folder still sitting on my desk. "She said I was the cautionary tale in the family. She said she grew up hearing my life explained as a warning." Jennifer made a sound like she had been struck. "Rachel, I'm not calling to punish you," I said. "I'm telling you because at 16, your daughter went looking for the truth herself. And what she found, I was not what we told her. We. I don't know why I said we. Maybe because even after all those years, family grammar is hard to break. Jennifer exhaled shakily. I was awful to you. I said nothing. That's so too. I know I was. Still nothing. Then, very softly, in a voice so unlike hers, it almost frightened me, she said, I think I was jealous. That got my attention. What? Of you? She said. Not of your life at the time. God. No. But of your nerve. You left. You walked away from the script. And I stayed inside it. And got rewarded for it. For so long. That I confused praise with happiness. I leaned back in my chair. Jennifer kept going. Like once the truth started. It no longer cared. About sounding elegant. I built the life. Everyone understands. She said. The firm. The husband. The house. The daughter with perfect grades. It all looked right from the outside. And every time someone asked about you, I heard myself describing you, like you were the cautionary version of freedom. I closed my eyes. Her voice cracked. That was easier than admitting. I didn't even know if I liked my own life anymore. I didn't rescue her from that sentence. Finally, she whispered. I'm sorry. I believed that she meant it. I did not. In that moment, know what to do with that belief. So I said the only true thing I had. It's late. Jennifer. I know. But Amanda got in on her own. You need to know that. I do know, she said quickly. I know she's brilliant. But hearing you say it, she wrote an extraordinary essay. Jennifer started crying again. Quieter this time. After a minute, she said, would you meet her? I looked up. What? She doesn't know. I'm talking to you right now. Jennifer said. But would you meet her? Before she decides? I think it would matter to her. I turned toward the window, where my reflection floated faintly over the black glass. For years, I had imagined what it would feel like if Jennifer ever admitted she had been wrong. I had imagined satisfaction. Instead, I felt tired, sad, open, in a place I had sealed off, for good reason. And underneath all of that, unexpectedly, I felt something else. Curiosity. About Amanda. About what it would mean to know one person in my family without first passing through everyone else's distortions. Yes, I said. Jennifer let out a shaky breath. Thank you. Don't thank me yet. A broken laugh through tears. That sounds like you. No, I said. It sounds like someone who reads carefully. When we hung up, I sat alone in my office for a long time, with Amanda's essay still on my desk and Jennifer's apology still moving through me, like weather I was not ready for. Then I reached over, closed the file, and turned off the lamp. Amanda was in, and for the first time in 12 years. So was the possibility of something else. 3 weeks later, I met Amanda for coffee, 2 blocks off campus. I got there early, which I almost never do, unless I'm nervous or trying to impress someone. And neither explanation made me particularly happy. The cafe was crowded, in the way college town cafes always are in spring. Half the room looked 19. Everyone had a laptop open, like a shield. I chose a small table, by the window, and checked my phone 3 times in 10 minutes. As if Jennifer might text to say the whole thing had been a mistake. Then Amanda walked in. I knew her immediately. Not because she looked exactly like Jennifer. She didn't. She had Jennifer's mouth. Maybe. And the same straight posture that suggested years of being told to take herself seriously. But her face was more open less defended. When she reached the table, she stopped for half a second, like she was suddenly aware that I was not just an idea anymore. Aunt Rachel? I stood up. Amanda. We did that awkward almost hug people do when they are related in theory and strangers in practice. Then we sat down and looked at each other over paper cups, like two people who had skipped 10 years of context and were expected to improvise. She smiled first. So, she said, you read my essay? I laughed despite myself. I did. I should probably apologize for forcing a family reckoning through the Common App. You should definitely not apologize for that. She smiled into her coffee. I didn't know you were the dean when I wrote it. I know. I found that out later and almost passed out. That seems appropriate. She laughed then. Properly. And some of the tightness between us broke. For a minute. We talked about easy things. Her senior spring classes. The admitted student schedule. The campus architecture. How terrifying it is to make a decision. Everyone around you wants to turn into a referendum on your future. Then the conversation shifted. Amanda wrapped both hands around her cup and said, my mom told me. She talked to you. She did. She cried a lot. That sounds right? Amanda looked down. She also told me what she used to say about you. I let that sit. I'm sorry, she said quietly. Not because I did anything. I know I didn't. But I'm sorry. That happened to you. There are some sentences you don't realize you've been waiting years to hear until they arrive in a voice you never expected. I looked out the window for a second before answering. Thank you. I said, that means more than you know. She nodded, then glanced back at me. Can I ask you something? Of course. Did you ever regret it? The question sat between us, without needing clarification. Dropping out. Leaving. Breaking from the approved version of life, before there was anything solid. On the other side, I thought about the apartment in Brooklyn. The cold. The debt. The loneliness. The humiliating little calculations. I regretted being scared. I said finally. I regretted how alone it felt. I regretted how long I let other people narrate my choices back to me. But leaving? I shook my head. No. Not once. Amanda looked relieved by that, in a way that made me instantly suspicious. What are you not telling me? I asked. She smiled without meaning to. My mom wants me to major in economics. There it is. She says I can write on the side. And what do you want? She didn't hesitate. English. Maybe creative writing. Maybe history too. I don't know exactly. I just know I don't want to build my whole life around being easy to explain. He sat back and looked at her. That's a strong instinct. I said, it's also apparently impractical. Most instincts worth following sound impractical to someone. She smiled at that, then grew serious again. I think my mom is scared I'll end up unhappy if I don't have a safe plan. That may be true. Amanda frowned. That's not very comforting. No, I said. But it's honest. Safety can reduce certain kinds of pain. It just can't tell you which pain you'll be able to live with. She was quiet. Then she said, is that why you work in admissions? Because of what happened to you? I leaned back in my chair. Nobody had ever asked me that. So directly. Partly. I said, at first I thought I worked in admissions because I was good at reading people. And I am. But the deeper reason is that I know what it feels like to be looked at and summarized too quickly. She didn't interrupt. So much of life, I went on, is being interpreted by people with incomplete information and too much confidence. Families do it. Schools do it. Employers do it. Admissions offices definitely do it. I paused. And sometimes they're wrong. In ways that alter a life. Amanda looked down at the table. For a moment. Then back at me. That line in my essay? She said. About being harder to explain. For a while? Yes. That was really about me too. I know. My whole life. I've been good at doing what gets rewarded. And I'm not complaining. I know that's a privilege. But sometimes I can feel myself becoming the version of me that earns approval fastest. I felt something deep in me soften. That's a smart thing to notice early. I said, did you? Not early enough. We talked for almost 2 hours. About writing. About classes. About ambition. And fear. And the uncomfortable fact that practical lives and meaningful lives do not always overlap as neatly as adults pretend. At one point, Amanda asked, were you mad at my mom when you read my essay? Yes. I said. And no? She laughed. That is not an answer. It's the only honest one. She folded her arms on the table and waited. I was angry that the story lasted as long as it did. I said, angry that a version of me I couldn't control kept circulating in rooms I wasn't in. But I wasn't angry at you. And when I called your mom, I don't think anger was the main thing I felt. What was? I thought about that. Sadness, I said. Relief. Maybe even gratitude. Which is annoying. Why annoying? Because it's very inconvenient to discover that the first person in your family who really sees you is a teenager with a better essay than half the adult applicants I read all year. Amanda laughed so suddenly, she almost spilled her drink. When we finally stood to leave, the cafe had thinned out. Outside, admitted students and their parents moved through New Haven with that particular combination of hope and anxiety that always makes the city feel, briefly, like a waiting room for the future. Amanda adjusted the strap of her bag and said, I think I'm going to choose Yale. I smiled. I had a feeling. Not because of you, she said quickly. Then she winced. I mean, not only because of you. That's a relief. I'd hate to think I manipulated an enrollment decision over cappuccino. She laughed. Then turned serious. I do think meeting you helped. I'm glad. She hesitated. Then, in a smaller voice, she said, I think my mom is trying. I nodded. I think so too. I don't know what happens now. Neither do I. That seemed to comfort her. Before she left, she hugged me again. This time, not awkwardly. The hug of someone deciding, in real time, to make room for you in her life. Thank you, she said into my shoulder. For what? For being real. After she walked away, I stood on the sidewalk, longer than I needed to, watching her disappear into the current of students, parents, and spring jackets. For years, I had imagined reconciliation as a dramatic event, a speech, a confession, a single moment where everything painful finally rearranged itself into meaning. That was not what happened. What happened instead was smaller. And, I think, Trua, Jennifer started calling. At first, once every few weeks, with the stiffness of someone approaching a skittish animal. Then more often, the calls were rarely about the past. For long, mostly, they were about Amanda's deposit deadline, her housing forms, and all the little steps that come with sending a child away. Sometimes, carefully, they became about Jennifer, her marriage which had been thinner than it looked. Her work, which paid well enough to postpone every difficult question, except the ones that arrived at 3 in the morning. The strange humiliation of realizing that the life everyone congratulated her for was one she had almost entirely built for witnesses. I did not rush to forgive her. That would have been dishonest. Forgiveness, if it was coming at all, had to travel through something less cinematic first. Repeated contact. Unperformed truth. Time. My parents reached out too, though in their own style. My mother sent a long email, with too many adjectives, and not enough specifics. My father called once, and said, after a great deal of clearing his throat, "Your mother tells me Amanda thinks the world of you." I smiled despite myself. That seems generous. She got into Yale. She did. A pause. Then, in the same tone he might once have used to discuss weather, taxes, or cholesterol, he said, "You've done well for yourself." It was not a perfect apology. It was not even a full one. But I understood my father well enough to know that some people can only offer dignity in the language they have. I have, I said. Another pause. Then, quietly, I was wrong. I closed my eyes. Yes, I said. You were. And somehow, because I said it plainly, the moment held. Amanda chose Yale and arrived in the fall, with 2 suitcases. Anxious parents. And the kind of alert excitement that makes campuses feel young, all over again. I no longer taught regular undergraduate courses, but I made time for her. Officially, it was mentorship. Unofficially, it was the slow construction of something I had never expected to have. A relationship inside my family that had not first been warped. By comparison, once a month, we met, sometimes for coffee, sometimes for lunch, once for a panicked walk across campus. After she got her first brutal workshop critique and became briefly convinced she should transfer to Brown and reinvent herself as a data scientist. You don't want to be a data scientist? I told her. I absolutely do not. Then this is probably just pain, not revelation. That helped. My relationship with Jennifer changed more gradually. There were still silences, still old instincts, still moments when I could feel the former shape of us trying to snap back into place. But now, at least, we could see it happening. By October, my parents came to visit campus. I gave them the kind of tour I had once imagined in private, back when fantasy still did the work that confidence couldn't. The stone courtyards, the residential colleges, my office. My father stood in my office, looking at the shelves, the framed degrees, the photographs from conferences and admitted students' events. I used to think, he said slowly, that a secure life had to look a certain way. I leaned against my desk and waited. He shook his head once. I was too rigid to tell the difference between fear and wisdom. My mother cried. Of course she cried. Jennifer rolled her eyes affectionately and handed her a tissue. That night, we had dinner together. Not Thanksgiving. Not a formal reckoning. Just dinner. Amanda told a story about a boy in her dorm who had decided, after 3 philosophy classes, that silence was a political act and therefore stopped answering direct questions. Jennifer laughed so hard, she nearly choked on her wine. My mother asked too many questions about laundry. My father made exactly one joke, which everyone treated like a lunar event. At one point, Amanda leaned toward me and said quietly, "This is weird." I smiled. Extremely. But kind of good? Yes. I said, kind of good. Later that week, I was back in my office, reviewing another stack of applications. That was the thing about admissions. No matter how dramatic, your personal life becomes. The files keep coming, one after another. Hope in standardized formats. Human beings translated into paper trails. Polished statements. And numbers, pretending to decide everything. I opened a file from Arizona. Community college credits. A transcript with gaps. A GPA. That would make some committees. Dismissive on site. Recommendations. Full of urgency. An essay about instability. Work. And the exhausting intelligence required to keep going when every adult system around you is underbuilt. Not perfect. Not clean. Very easy to underestimate. I read it twice. Then I reached for my pen and wrote across the top of the review sheet. Strong admit. Committee discussion essential. I sat back for a moment. After writing it, years earlier, I thought the deepest injury my family had given me was disapproval. It wasn't. It was misreading me. So completely. And for so long that I almost started participating in it myself. Amanda had interrupted that. Not by rescuing me. Not by rewriting the past. Just by looking carefully and refusing the convenient version. I placed the Arizona file in the committee pile and reached for the next one.